Welcome. You're listening to Guiding Stars and the Jeffrey Wolfe Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. I'm here with Stacie Pazura and a team of evolutionary astrologers with special guest Erin Sullivan to discuss the archetype of Pluto, 8th house, and Scorpio, and how it is expressed naturally. Here's our team. There's Erin and Sol and Ari, Deva, Tara, and my partner here, Stacie Pazura, is also going to share an extended piece on Scorpio today, in addition to her joining me here at the beginning. So the body of work of evolutionary astrology that Jeffrey Wolfe Green brought to this earth was founded on the planet Pluto, the natural ruler of the 8th house and the sign Scorpio. Pluto is a planet of the soul and the planet of evolution. Your soul is an immutable consciousness that has its own individuality, and that consciousness remains intact from life to life. The soul will manifest a personality, and each personality that the soul manifests from lifetime to lifetime has an ego, which can be seen by the position of your natal moon. The moon serves as a focal point to create your own self-image, which is the ego your soul needs in order to facilitate its ongoing evolution. We are taking a much deeper dive today. And if I can see that water trinity slide. Pluto and Scorpio in the 8th house is a water energy. The 8th house is a water house. Pluto, the ruler for Scorpio, is a water sign. Scorpio is a water sign. As part of this water trinity that we focus so much on in evolutionary astrology, because you can only evolve through the emotional body. You have to get into the water, into those emotions, in order to access your soul, seen here with Scorpio, ultimately, which will lead you back to the source. And so you have to get into the emotional body for the soul that's traveling down that river to find its way back to the sea and the ultimate source where you were created. And so when I say we're taking a much deeper dive, that's what Scorpio reflects, the depth of who you are and the root of who you are. The soul is analogous to a fingerprint. No two are alike. And Pluto, along with Scorpio in the 8th house, represents the archetypes through which all of us come face to face with the limits of who we are as opposed to who we are not. Pluto rules the root chakra. It's where the soul lives, hence the name root, as well as the 3rd chakra or the navel chakra. You can see here at the root that Pluto shares rulership with Uranus and Saturn. Uranus reflecting the soul's vibration that emanates out into the world, that sends your signal to others and says, this is who I am. Saturn reflects the energy that protects you, allows you to defend against something that where you need to protect yourself, perhaps. And so the outer casing that protects your soul at the root chakra will be varying in degrees in terms of its depth or thickness, depending on how much the soul is repressing. If you're repressing a lot and you're not expressing a natural version of yourself or a natural expression of yourself in full, that outer casing of Saturn might be quite dense, quite thick. If you're walking in the world naturally and expressing your natural vibration that emanates from your soul, that outer casing is going to be very thin. You won't need as much to protect yourself. You're wanting to step forward into the world with who you are. And that instinct at the 3rd chakra, co-ruled by Mars, your instinct. Mars is currently retrograde in Aries right now. Mars is the younger brother to Pluto, and they work together to help you evolve. Mars is a choice-making planet, younger brother to Pluto, and Mars will take what is unconscious in your soul and make it happen. Mars says, hey, soul, what do you want? I'll go make it happen for you. And so anything that is emanating right now in your life from your instinctual body, it's coming from your soul. Mars is retrograde. It's inverted. And so things are heating up inside of us. And we are being shown and told what it is, told consciously, what it is through our instinct that we need in order to evolve. What is it that we need to eliminate that is no longer serving us? What is it that is holding you back or slowing you down? The two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day that you find out why you were born, why you are here. And evolutionary astrology is so powerful in its ability to answer that question for you. Why are you here? What is it that your soul came here to do? Now, the evolutionary impulse is to evolve, and so those with an 8th house Pluto or planets in Scorpio or in the 8th house have desired to transform their personal limitations by forming relationships to anything that is symbolized by what they've needed or desired to evolve. Now, this process implies something that we are not, or something that we do not already have. And we can see this energy reflected so much in the powers of this country in the United States here. I realize we have some people here from other countries, but I'm showing you here today this chart that we have that started at 1 o'clock Pacific time in the US, where Pluto is stationary direct in the sign of Capricorn. And we have a president that is experiencing some pretty intense transits himself, and we will talk about that in a moment. I just wanted to point out to you that asteroid Lilith, which also I would say is the feminine archetype that rules the root chakra with Pluto, the natural empowered woman, Lilith, which is the asteroid in your chart, not the black moon Lilith, but the asteroid, conjunct the ascendant right now in Sagittarius, the archetype of natural law, also conjunct the south node in Sagittarius. And so I want to also draw to your attention, of course, Pluto being stationed there, squaring Mars and Aries, it's retrograde. This is an energy of karma. We reap what we sow. And we are living this and living it in living, breathing color as we speak. So let's move to the next slide. Just a couple days ago, of course, we discovered, or less than that now, that President Trump has the coronavirus. And for months, he has been telling his base that you don't even need a mask, it's going to just disappear on its own. And now he's in the hospital with this virus. Pluto and Scorpio in the 8th house connects to viruses and bacteria, diseases and global death. And Saturn and Capricorn just recently stationed direct as well. It's the outer casing to the root chakra that protects your soul. And that Saturn element connects to death, fear, depression, and reflection. Actually, death is also a Scorpio archetype or energy. Saturn does connect to time or running out of time. And so let's move to the next slide. Stacie, you and Linda and I were on email just back and forth around 10 or 10:30 at night, Thursday night, which was after 1 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. And somebody, I think it was you, Stacie, that sent me a link to The Guardian, and it was that's how I found about President Trump having COVID. So here's the chart. His chart's in the center, overlapped with these transits. So did you get alerted on your phone, by the way? Oh no, you found the article. Wow, that's amazing. I want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that Pluto and Saturn are both exactly opposing his Saturn and Venus in Cancer, and they're forming inconjuncts to his Sun sign and to his Mars in Leo. These are very game-changing transits. And so when you are living through a Pluto transit of any kind, even if you don't have a prominent Scorpio 8th house Plutonian chart, believe me, you know it. It doesn't leave you for years, really. It's a metamorphic energy. And if you have made choices that reflect a shadowy side, it will come back to bite you, as Trump is experiencing now firsthand. What are your thoughts, Stacie, on current events?
Gosh, let me guess. Yeah, it's ironic because Trump has been a figure for many, and has really had the mic and has been distributing messages which is really antithetical to the science of the coronavirus. There's been almost an egocentric, I don't know, assumption that maybe, you know, he has some superiority to it. I don't know. And then next thing you know, he has it. And so I think it's a point of intense exposure. And it's also a very difficult learning experience for him because, you know, we have to remember Trump's personality is very much grandiose, and he has tactics that he uses to maintain his power. And in this case, it's especially interesting with Lilith. Well, not in this chart, but where this virus is not someone that he can single out. It doesn't have a face. It doesn't have an identity. There's no one to manipulate. There's no one to bribe. There's, you know, it's like karma has its hands on his throat, not putting pressure on his throat yet. But you've got to know that that's inducing a lot of life and death. It's an emotional shock, and you can see that sun is conjunct his natal Neptune in the second house, the survival instinct. So I simultaneously have great compassion for the gravity that this is going to impose on him, but at the same time, it's, as you say, it's a traceable karmic event. So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, the timing of this is just immense. Of course, today we did not plan on this, the way that we scheduled these webinars, and Pluto is stationary direct in Capricorn, and we are talking about, this is just, I mean, like I said, game changing for him. Everything catches up to us. Like I said, you know, the law of cause and effect is what we call karma, and this is a Plutonian experience for us all. We can also experience good karma, and we know through our choices and through the results of those choices what that feels like. Now there's two ways cataclysmically how people evolve. Of course, there's two ways in the context of evolution. We think of natural uniform change, progressive change, like a tree growing, but then there's also cataclysm, which is linked with Pluto, Scorpio in the 8th house, which is in place for two reasons. People draw this into their life for two reasons. Number one, it could be a karmic reason. In this case, Trump is experiencing a karmic reason, or else people can experience a cataclysm because their soul might have been resistant to change. And it was some kind of shock that your soul might have needed in order to evolve. Remembering that we are all responsible for what we create, and all souls attract whatever it is that we need in order to evolve. So, I'm sure we'll be sharing more about this a little bit later on. All right, I have a very special video I want to show you. This is a client of mine, and she was abused by multiple people growing up, none of which were family members, babysitters and the like. By the time she was 16, she became a stripper. And while none of those expressions of sexuality are natural, she is using her life experience now to empower other young girls and women who have been victims of sexual abuse or sex trafficking. She became a professional dancer, and she's taking a workshop to other countries to try and empower women to get back in touch with their bodies in a natural way, to reclaim what is theirs. And so I wanted to share this. Her book comes out today. So in watching this video, you might think she has a lot of planets in Scorpio or the 8th house. And really it's more the Pisces element that you're witnessing, being a victim of a reality that she didn't, well, you might think might not choose. Of course, all souls choose what's coming for various reasons. She's chosen to take her experience and empower other women with what happened. She said so obviously too in this video. And where you see this represented is Pluto conjunct Saturn retrograde in Libra in the 5th house. And look how they're forming beautiful trines to Mercury, the North Node, and Gemini in the 12th house. And this is really a life where she's come to get her power back, to empower other women. She's doing incredible things on an international level too, with the moon in Pisces in the 9th. You can see that South Node in Sag with Neptune in Sag. Neptune rules that 9th house moon in Pisces. So Natasha's Not My Name is her new book. It comes out today. If you're interested or you know of anybody that might benefit from a read like this memoir, check it out. You can find her on Amazon.
Can I just say one thing, Kristin?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I'm really struck by can we go back to the slide, please? Yeah. I'm really struck by that Saturn-Pluto retrograde in the 5th house in Libra, and how it's forming that disseminating trine to Mercury in Gemini in the 12th. Because, you know, with Pluto and Saturn in that 5th house, it could potentially lead to freezing, you know, taking that trauma and freezing. And through that 12th house and through the freedom of movement and dance, she's able to get that energy flowing again. And so I just thought that was a...
Absolutely. I mean, thank you for pointing that out, Stacie, because in past lives, you can see with the Neptune on the South Node that she just lost herself. You know, she kind of disappeared from the scene. That moon is also squaring Uranus and Jupiter and Sag. So, I mean, the trauma just really paralyzed her in the past. And so she knew she had to relive the trauma. That's what happens when we're looking at these retrograde planets. Look at all her retrograde planets, especially Uranus retrograde. Even the gentleman who was speaking talked about all the PTSD that these girls have. She came in, Isabella came in to this life with PTSD. And so, but the Uranus retrograde is a relive scenario. She had to relive the trauma. She had to re-enter the fracture, as Jeffrey Wolfe Green would say, in order to heal it. And so, of course, she did come in with those prominent aspects, like you said, Stacie, right there, that allowed her to move forward, right, to heal it, to defrost from that experience, so to speak. And yeah, I just love it, like just to see women empowering other people, other women in this way.
Right, and the disseminating nature, sorry, there's background noise. The disseminating nature of that trine shows that there's a social need to take that healing and to share it with other girls who have been through similar traumas, and to really help them find their purpose and that freedom. And so it's a beautiful, powerful story.
Yeah, right. I mean, also the Mars right on the ascendant in Cancer. You can see that natural attraction she had as a young girl to others. All right, so in line with Pluto and Scorpio in the 8th house, we think of cataclysms. And as I mentioned earlier, we always want to ask the question, why? And this little girl is a conservationist, was a conservationist at the age of 7. She's a little activist. She is just in love with the ocean, in particular sharks of all things. And her big fight surrounds all the plastics that are polluting our sea. And she became an author at the age of 9. She wrote a book called Coral's Quest for Children that speaks about this issue that we have in our oceans. And I'm going to go backward here. This is her book here that she released in March of 2020. And it's an incredible book for children, and a wonderful story, beautifully illustrated. And I'd like to go back now to the slide before, and we'll come back to her chart. We did these a little bit out of order, my apologies. So, of course, for all kids, COVID has just been devastating because they can't go to school, they can't do their sports, they can't do their music or their arts. And she was incredibly depressed this summer because of not being able. She's got this moon in the 7th house in Aquarius. She's a very social being. She's very involved in many things. She's incredibly talented. And the fires that stormed through Southern Oregon burned down her home, her family's home. and essentially everything was gone. She lost everything. Okay, this is a little powerful being who is doing incredible things on this planet. By the age of 9, she had already done so much. Why this girl? Why this family? It's kind of like, what did she do to deserve this? And you know what, there's sometimes when I meet with clients, and I'm sure you guys all feel this way, where we just can't wrap our heads around what happened, why. Even though we really know why. We can look at the symbols, we can talk about it, but some stories just for me are really hard to stomach, and this is one of them. And so I just wanted to share this because, again, Mercury's in Scorpio today, and we have 2 beautiful souls who are doing incredible things, and they're just doing what they can to try and educate and communicate and bring more balance back to this world. And so just wanted to let you know that both of their books are available, Coral's Quest and Natasha's Not My Name. I want to just take a quick look at Zoe's chart here. She does have a South Node in Cancer with the Moon in Aquarius in the 7th house, and which speaks of Jupiter on that moon. She's, like I said, just such an activist, so social, so connected. She's super talented. She's an incredible musician, dancer, artist. And so what I wanted to say just briefly, and Stacie, if you have any comments, I'd love to hear it too, is just that I guess it's suffice it to say that in her most recent life, she lost a lot more than just her home and everything inside of it. The South Node in Cancer ruled by that moon, and the moon ruled by that Uranus and Neptune in the 8th house, retrograde. She's a little Scorpio girl here. So, you know, lost a lot more than her home. She lost people she loved, and ultimately, actually, she had a very early exit in that life. You can see that Mars in the 12th squaring her 4th house sun in Scorpio. And there's a great deal of abandonment, loss, and betrayal. So what happened with this fire would trigger that loss, but her animals survived, and well, actually her 2 dogs survived, not her cat, but all of, her parents and her brother also survived. So what happens is, like I said, all these retrogrades again, look at this chart, Uranus is retrograde, and we've got Neptune retrograde as well, Chiron retrograde. And this trauma from the past really was around the same age in that life. Maybe she was a little older. It just reactivated that piece of her past, but she's a survivor now. She gets to live, and she gets to do everything she didn't get to do in her last life. That's why she's been so unbelievably active and productive and involved in so many things. She's been making up for lost time. And so unfortunately, she's pretty traumatized by what's happened recently, and she just really needs to be a 10-year-old for a bit. But I know that she's going to get back to it, and she's really come here to do some big things. People with strong Plutonian charts, they go big or they go home, right? I mean, Stacie, it's black and white. There's no middle ground, and there won't be for her. So please say a prayer for this girl, and her family's doing well. They do have insurance for the home, but there's going to be a lot of rebuilding that needs to happen. And it was the last webinar that we did on Libra. I shared a post that her mom posted, and the last line said, "We will rebuild with love." And so that's what they are doing. Any thoughts, Stace, before we move into our first speaker today?
Just a tiny point to dovetail on having come out of this traumatic previous life at such a young age. That Saturn in the 2nd shows that she had a lot to do in that life that she intended, and it's internal. And so this is the lifetime, and perhaps this is why she's so accomplished at such a young age. There's just this desire to get on with it and to have it be a productive life. So yeah, I wish her the best. She's a big soul.
She's a very big soul. And I posted something on the School of Evolutionary Astrology message board. There's more information on her story there. So. All right, Stacie, I'll let you introduce our first speaker.
Okay, we are super excited today to have Erin Sullivan. So please go ahead, Erin. We're excited to hear from you.
Oh, thank you. That was all very interesting introduction. I really thought so. And I was so inspired the other night by the topic that I'm going to be talking on, which is basically Pluto, who is the guardian of the soul. And I wrote myself a 6-page, 7-page article that I'm going to read and share with you about all my understanding of Hades and Pluto, because he was not a bad god. I mean, it was the fall of Olympus. Zeus and Jupiter, whose mountain domain was completely destroyed with Olympus, the fall of Olympus. It came to drawing straws between the 3 primary gods of our known world in the primary domains. So the drawing of straws ended up being between Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto, and Uranus, the heavens. And so when they drew straws, the Earth was assigned to Poseidon and Neptune. So he actually rules oceans and underwater streams and things that live in the sea. So he's very much an oceanic god. And the second one is the sky, the heavens, Uranus. So Uranus falls into this as being the god of the heavens. And in fact, the underworld god, of course, the unfortunate Hades, Pluto, he drew the short straw, so he was assigned to guard the underworld of the shades. And it has a lot to do with transitioning the planet Pluto, because it really is a liminal planet. And liminality literally means thresholding. The limn in Greek is the crossover place between one realm and another, and the entryway to your home. And the threshold itself is both a holy and a liminal space where anything can happen. And both in transitional spaces and between the upper world, the limn, and the underworld, we have this blanket between us so that we can protect ourselves, or we can take the chance and cross over into the area of the mystery. And so one example of this business of really paying attention to thresholding, it being the crossover limb between one realm and another, which is essentially like even the entryway to your home. The threshold is both holy and liminal, and where anything can happen. So, for example, in rabbinic Judaism, the mezuzah is affixed to the doorposts of Jewish homes, which they kiss as they enter and depart from their houses to fulfill the mitzvah. And so there's a biblical commandment to write the words of God on the gates and the doorposts of your house, which is in Deuteronomy. And in part, this is to guard against Hades crossing the threshold. So there's one unwanted guest in every house. Liminality is actually really important in astrology because everything is changing all the time. And thus, there is within that a cautionary note about prediction, speaking of that which is to become. And we must be very rigorous and adhere to natural law and not predict, but describe, and to invoke within the individual that we might be working with astrologically, but to invoke within them a rising of some interior experience and understanding, and give them the space for that to be really acknowledged. So as an astrologer, we need to be a scribe as opposed to, say, a forecaster. Pluto demands a form of invisibility or shape-shifting. And it's, that was a funny noise. Yeah, and so actually, Pluto holds the wealth of all of our Earth, Mother Gaia, in the belly of in the Earth. And in astrology, we have to be fluid and nobody, literally, in our work and consulting practice. So we set aside ourself, our persona, and our relationship with our ego, which simply in Latin means I am. Ego, literally, if I come into a room, I go ego sum, which in Latin would be I am here. So ego is really just a Latin word for self. And, as astrologers, we're spokespersons, representatives. We're not divine, but we're human. And so we have to come to astrology in that form of mentality, because Pluto demands that we shed our assumed identity in the interpretation and in client work. There's a short story that I'm going to say, from a very long book called The Odyssey. And it's written by Homer in the 7th century. And it's all about Odysseus trying to get home from the Trojan War, to his home, which would normally be about a 10-day trip down the sea from Troy to Ithaca. And so being nobody when in transition, especially under the transit of Pluto, it's really essential to the ego that is to become Udis, or nobody, or no one. It's often used as a pseudonym for this state of being. In other words, the Udis, or nobody, or no one, really has a lot to do with being a really important and fulfilling worker in astrology. And when I say, in Homer's Odyssey, when Odysseus escapes this giant monster, who, when he finally gets away from him and he scrambles down to his ship, he calls back up to him when the monster says, "What is your name? What is your name?" And he calls back up and he says he is nobody, Utis. But he blows it when he thinks he's safe on his ship, and he calls back up to the giant, "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes." And thus he broke the rule of Pluto in transit by hubris, by naming himself and declaring himself in an ego, I amness centric way. So when we're in transition, we never should really name ourselves, because it's important that we realize that if we name ourselves, we aren't really in transition. We are putting a stamp on a place so that we will not have to move, that we exist, but we're not in fluid motion. And it's very important to be nobody. In fact, it's essential when dealing with Pluto. The highest intent of a transit to the horoscope from Pluto is to lose ego and gain self. And if we go back to the origins of the domains of the three top gods, and the result of their drawing straws to see which domain each god would rule, it talks about Pluto, who drew the short straw, initiating him into the place of the shades, the dead, who lived in a netherworld somewhere in the, under the earth in some mythological location. And as they awaited reincarnation to another life, Hades, Pluto guarded and held domain there and was very kind. And Hermes was the god who winged the dead down into the mouth of the underworld. There's something in the Odyssey about him doing this after the war. And he was then greeted by Hecate, who was the woman who guarded the threshold. and who initiated the individuals who were entering into the realm of Hades, and the realm of in between, which literally means being nobody. In other words, there's a place in time when you need to be nobody. And thus makes Pluto the guardian of people in transition, in a state of death of the body, but not of the soul. Pluto is a planet who, being very eccentric in its orbit, which is 17 degrees inclined to the ecliptic, as everybody here knows, for the most extreme reaches of its center. So you see how it intersected with Neptune in this, and it intersects with Neptune again, but it also intersects with Uranus, but it's the only, and then it makes there is no connection between Pluto and any other planet except outer planets. So there, he is the god of our solar system, basically. I mean, it's so important when you're in transition under the transit of Pluto that the ego, I am, from utis, from nobody, is often used pseudonym for this state. By literally being nobody, it's essential, dealing with Pluto, the highest intent of a transit to the planet Pluto, to the horoscope, is to lose ego and gain, self, uppercase S, self, the deep, deep soul of the self. And Hermes, who is also part of this story, it was Pluto who drew the short straw, which actually is the one who had to integrate his life into guarding the dead and holding domain there as people waited for a reincarnation or a transition into another lifetime. And Hermes was the one who actually would bring the dead down to the mouth of the underworld, and then greeted by Hecate, who is a very gracious goddess, but being greeted by Hecate initiated them into their realm of the in-between, of being nobody. And so it does make sense that it's, that Pluto is the guardian of people in transition and in a state of death of the body, but not of the soul, as I had said before. I mean, and it has a really long orbital period as well. It's about 248 years. So we can have a Saturn return, and we can have a Uranus return at 84, which is interesting because it's very often, it's a time like 8 at the Uranus return, what I call liftoff time, where a lot of people die at 84 or 85. And it's not, it's not sad. It just seems so interesting to me to see a Uranus return in concert with the departure from the known into the unknown realm. And, with Pluto's orbital period, it's about 248 years, and its characteristics are substantially different from the rest of the planets, as you noticed in the diagram, that it has a very eccentric orbit, which appears to it intersects only Scorpio. And you'll see that what the orbit of Pluto actually inclines to the ecliptic by 17 degrees, which is why there was a huge argument in 1986, and that's where us radical astrologers in 86 got involved with the scientists in an argument. And the only person who, of the 186 scientists who signed the edict against astrology, the only person, scientist of note, who did not and would not agree to sign such a thing was Carl Sagan, who is a Scorpio. So Carl Sagan, you get into Pluto and Scorpio, you get into everything. And yes, there's when New Horizons actually got out almost to Pluto. It's fantastic and crossed over the orbits. And so that possibility is really something else. that we had that happen, that experience. But the planet Pluto itself was discovered by a man named Clyde Tombaugh in 1930. Now, Marie Curie, who was the discoverer of radium with her husband, died in 1931 from what's called pernicious anemia, which is basically radiation poisoning. And so from using and working with radioactive elements, she had Uranus natally squaring her Pluto. It also brought with it the first global Great Depression in 1931. So Pluto has a lot to do with both gifts and losses. And I think another fascinating fact is that Pluto spends the shortest length of time in its whole of its 200 and some orbit. In the whole of its orbit, it spends the shortest time in Scorpio. I guess nobody could stand it if it stayed any longer in Scorpio. I was thinking to myself when I realized that years and years ago. And 35 years in the opposite sign of Taurus. So just be glad that you're not going to be around, or maybe you will, and have Pluto transiting, if you have anything in your chart at all, for 35 years, when you could be just barely made it through Pluto transiting Scorpio. But I think that Pluto could probably only take, or Scorpio can only take about 12 years of Pluto transiting. Because, like, for instance, on a personal note, while I was living in London, I had that long transit over all my personal planets, including my sun and ascendant, because I have a lot of Scorpio, and 3 planets in Leo, Mars, Saturn, Pluto. So I had a really intense, but it was so productive that it was tremendously productive years. But my 2 closest friends at the time, for 30, 40 years, and colleagues and my father all died during this time. And I was disinherited by my father because I became an astrologer and not a physician like him. So I was cut out of his life, his will. I mean, so the will of the father was like coming to the Pluto, and it was right as I was getting a very strong Pluto transit that I discovered this. It was going over. In fact, I checked the will and noticed that Pluto was at 7 Libra when my father made this will to disinherit me, and my moon is 7 Libra. So Pluto was transiting my moon, and I didn't know this. Yeah, I'm just living my life, in the 70s, and I had no idea. And so, but when I thought, well, maybe I should look at the transit and see what's going on with my father's timing, and I went, oh my God, he cut me out as Pluto was going over my moon in the 11th house, conjunct Neptune. So anything about that really brings a lot to the picture. But these, these myths that are so deeply embedded in our astrological world, in the horoscope, the gods' domains are clearly defined by the relationship to each other. And according to Robert Graves, the great mythographer who popularized that concept in the 20th century, Hecate was the original triple moon goddess and guards the entrance to Hades. I'm repeating myself, but I'm also emphasizing that Hecate is the one who welcomes and envelops the dead into the realm of Hades. So Hades isn't a bad place. It's just where you go while you await reincarnation. And so Pluto is often seen in astrology as negative, as a negative astrological force. And indeed, it can be one of the most dire planets in the horoscope, but in extremis, it can draw one into the darkest corners of our own psyche, the underworld, if you will, of our soul. And if you have Pluto like in transiting a very personal planet, then you will probably understand exactly what I'm talking about, of this seductive misery that can come up with a Pluto transit. But it can also bring a tremendous consciousness that we don't even know we've got until the Pluto transit comes along and says, wake up, wake up. I mean, the seduction of Persephone, in other words, the story where Persephone is sniffing the narcissus flower in the field, getting away from her classmates as they're on an outing. She sniffs this narcissus, which has I love narcissi. So, but if you smell them, there's a whiff of death. It's the kind of sweetness that has a darkness to it. And, it's quite astounding. So she's smelling this, and while she's sniffing it, up comes and roaring to the surface of the earth, Pluto, Hades, in his chariot, and grabs her. And so even though the seduction of Persephone in later Roman myths was typically depicted as the rape of Proserpine, there's evidence in my way of looking at it and reading it in the origin, is that there's evidence of her longing as an adolescent schoolgirl for adventure and a lover, and the seductive scent of the narcissus drew her away from her schoolmates and fellow students, and the rest is ancient myth. I mean, I often think that Hades, Pluto, was lonely in the underworld with only the shades for company, and Hecate as guardian of the entry to the place of the dead, who basically wandered about waiting for incarnation into another life. And so thus in astrology, Pluto also rules transition, mystery, seduction, abduction, and loss of wits. I mean, we can become witless when they fall to the ground, leaving us vulnerable to the gods of the night. And so I think it's very important to experience a Pluto transit, to actually experience it, rather than sort of hope it'll go away or wait for it to come or go to the astrologer and say, when is it going to be over? It's never over. I mean, once you have a Pluto transit, you are awakened and never, ever can go back to the unconscious in the way that you've been able to do before. And in astrological terms, Pluto has a tremendous power that can arise from the deepest unconscious in our minds and our hearts and souls. And in the horoscope, the position of Pluto is often hard for astrologers to actually interpret, especially newbies. Really hard to interpret. Because Hades, Pluto, does not give up information easily. He's a secret. I mean, that's the whole point. And the fact of Hades being the planet of soul and mystery schools, in my terminology, I believe that it's the one that doesn't give up information that we don't necessarily need to know until a certain event or situation arises that demands consciousness of it. And so there was Persephone, seduced by this sickly sweet scent of the narcissus flower, and was like, sniffing it when Hades arrived to take her into the underworld to be his consort. She would fall in love with him. They married in the underworld. So Persephone and had made a bond with Hades. However, the subsequent permanent winter that her mother, Demeter, brought to the earth as a curse, as a revenge for the abduction, became unmanageable for Gaia, Earth, and thus Demeter and Pluto actually got together and made a deal. So that the deal was that Pluto, or that Persephone, would remain for half the time in Hades with Pluto and the shades, and at spring would rise into the upper air to be with her mother Demeter, partaking in a mystical dance ritual, which is noted especially in Jung's psychology. The realm of the unknown drew Jung strongly, and there are 20 volumes of Jung's work, all of which address the great mysteries and asks questions. Unlike Freud, who told us what to do, Jung asked us what we should do. And that's why I became an analyst, was I thought, I'd read actually Jung when I was a kid. My father's library was huge and very dominant in the living room. And so I actually did read some Jung when I was really young. And so it turned out to be that way, when I realized that there are the classical references to, exactly what Demeter's mystery school was. We don't have any, and I plagued my professors when I was taking classics at the age of 38. Once my kids got old enough, I went back to university and to get myself a classics degree. And also I note that Jeffrey Wolfe Green's first book was Pluto, and he has 16 degrees of Scorpio rising, as do I. And I also have Sun, Mercury, Ascendant, square, and Pluto, and ninth house with Saturn and Mars. So these charts are really intense. There's nothing really, they're very intense. They're very important placements for the planets that have to do with Plutonian measures. And you see in my chart, I have Sun, square, Pluto, Mars, and Saturn, along with the South Node. And of course, that must mean that I've done something in my past life that brought me into this life, so that I would have to do something that was so unorthodox that my father would disinherit me and leave me broke. So I have to laugh because I'm, to this day, I slave away doing people's horoscopes for income. That's what Pluto's all about. It's about stripping you down to what you know. And I guess in the ninth house with Mars, Saturn, and Pluto, and I think Jeff has the same image except for Mars. Mars, Saturn, Pluto in the ninth has to do with needing to know the depths of everything. Nothing will cross my mind and depart without question. And Pluto, as I said, wasn't even sighted until 1930, but just because you can't see it, remember this always, doesn't mean it isn't there. And as history and cycles prove this to be true in our own personal lives. Clyde Tombaugh, who is the astronomer who developed a massive telescope toward the end of 1929, because on February 18th, 1930, he viewed the distant planet on plates taken on the 23rd and the 29th of January. The discovery was announced in March 13th, 1930, which happens to be Percival Lowell's birthday, and Lowell himself had been convinced of an outermost planet in 1905 and spent the rest of his life trying to calculate to get there. So he knew Pluto existed, but he didn't know how to get there. And so Pluto in our horoscope really speaks to these myths and can seduce one into dark and smoky realms, where the living dead are. We don't have to leave our home to encounter Pluto. We're not bad people to have Pluto in our horoscopes. We all have it somewhere in our chart. And we all hold the unseen mystery in our souls. And it's in the soul that holds all, and it's revealed to us at astonishing times in our lives. You can't sort of go and say, well, okay, all right, soul, I'd really like to know what's going on. It will tell you when your time is right. And so the soul holds all, and it's only, rises to assuage fear, and very often occurring with the transit of Pluto aspecting a natal planet. I've noticed that people who have been clients, and they're having a Pluto transit to a personal planet, say like to the sun or the moon, Venus, those planets, Mercury, that they come with some kind of question of mystery. That there's something that they don't know and they need to know. And if maybe even a couple of my clients at last resort came to the astrologer to find out how many ways in which they can embody Pluto. And also, which is also very dangerous, is to project it out onto others, Pluto, your own Pluto, or introject it from the collective unconscious, from a situation, a person, a place, an event. It can result in depression or an illness related to hidden issues within the soul, because psyche is the Greek word for soul, and thus it's an ever-evolving container for all of our own issues and passions and actions and results. It's very often that we can have a spiritual relationship with our own Pluto. We can marry Pluto and thus rule over the domain of our own hidden realms and dark corners of our psyche. And our inner Demeter can make a deal with Pluto to release the love and the beauty and the youth of our inner life as well, bringing peace to the soul through hard work and consciousness of one's power and also lack thereof, which is very important. Although the unexpected, the unseen, still arises, it's to our advantage to integrate the Pluto-Scorpio agency into our conscious mind. And it can only be done bit by piece. It's not like you can just sort of swallow it whole and suddenly become enlightened. But I think it's really important that there's always a feeling within us that something is not quite done or complete or finished or fully embodied when it comes to Pluto. And I think this is because we never have a full return of it as it transits from its natal place around the horoscope wheel. So we never really get a full shot of Pluto, like Uranus will return to 84, liftoff time, whereas Neptune doesn't, and Pluto certainly doesn't. And so in relationships, Pluto is a force to become very aware of. So the positive side, the side where he is actually the caretaker of the dead and the newlywed. That's a kind of a marriage that has to be made between Pluto and our uppercase S self in our horoscope. And this takes conscious, serious work. Just as it took a lot of work to be born, it takes a lot of work for Pluto to be part of your life. And it cannot and should not be ignored, but rather encountered and integrated bit by piece into our whole self. Again, uppercase S, self, system in the horoscope. So Pluto's placement in the natal chart and its aspects from other planets show where the mind, body, and soul are drawn to find something different, something risky, dangerous, with a little whiff of death to the ego or the self or one's old character. So, I mean, you can't have a Pluto transit without something dying. It's absolutely necessary because it has to reincarnate in some new fashion. And so, it's not about Pluto transits, you're going to die, because people have actually, made an appointment with me because they had that on their mind. Like, I'm having Pluto over my son and am I going to die? And I'm going, I have no idea. I mean, yes, someday. But certainly not during our reading, it's not likely that you're going to die. And I'll explain further that Pluto's aspect in the natal chart and aspects to it from other planets show where the mind and body and soul, where something is different. And it's really important to realize that Pluto is there to bring us to our knees on occasion, either to pray or to elevate him or to find that place in our soul that's deathless and that we can live with, that we live with death, the never-ending soul, and thus feel a transcendental high from the power of Plutonian force. Now that might sound a bit contradictory for what I was speaking of earlier, but it's in perfect harmony with being incarnated in the flesh. Our soul intent can appear to be in contrast to Pluto's placement in the horoscope, but in fact, the most significant planet short of the sun, because the sun in Scorpio is a hard aspect to Pluto, if you have it, can draw one into a place of high excitement and risk. And so it could be a very exciting and exotic transition and transit with Pluto, but they're very hard to predict, transits of Pluto to planets, to predict what's going to happen or how is it going to end up. You can only introduce it, as a friend, as a rather, sort of alarming, but at the same time, very sort of almost sexy kind of friend where you're seduced into, a relationship or into your life or into working. That writing a book, for instance, is very Plutonian because you're dying inside and it's never going to be perfect. And it's like life. And so the more conscious we can make ourselves of our own Pluto placement in our chart and the house that it rules, which is equally, if not a little less important, but the house that it rules, and any planets in Scorpio that are in the house, that in the Scorpio house, on the cusp. And so the more that we find our personal psychological and spiritual depth, power, control, and our inner relationship with power, as Pluto says in the Plato, I should say. That's funny because, there's a misprint in one of my books where there's a Plato transit as opposed to a Pluto transit, and I love it. I didn't ask them to change it for reprint. I mean, to have a transit of Plato would be fantastic. I know I did. I had 4 years transit of Plato. But,
Be better than Pluto, huh?
Yeah. Well, it was actually during a Pluto transit that I was doing all this. All this depth study and work and, really digging deeply into my own self and, finding various, places that were unpleasant for me and I didn't like. And so, it was really a really important time. But I mean, for speaking of which, the house that has Scorpio ruling its cusp is actually a container for Pluto's force and energy. And if that house contains a planet or planets, then Pluto becomes the dispositor of that planet or those planets, and thus collaborates with the planets in Scorpio. So, if you have Pluto in your chart, which you do, and you have planets in Scorpio and it's dispositing them, then I would attend to those planets as, you would attend to someone who is under siege, if you will. Because, Pluto's it's not an easy planet. It's not that comfortable. But we can become very comfortable with it. I mean, at my age, I've come to a lot of terms with Pluto, but that doesn't mean that I don't argue with him.
Hey, Erin, we need to wrap this up.
Well, Pluto then becomes the ruler of those planets. And I think that's what it is, what we need to say is, Hades, come into my heart and soul, and bringing with you all your attributes, good or ill, be they frightening, sad, or just plain ignorant, so I may empower myself by the enveloping.
Wonderful. Oh, it's so wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Erin Sullivan. Wow, that was just a lot, so much to take in and integrate. I loved all the places that you went there. Somebody's got a microphone too loud here. But what I wanted to say to you before we move on to our next speaker is, while I loved everything that you said, what stood out for me so much is when you said that Pluto is where the Pluto experience or the transit is when you find that place in your soul that's deathless. And it just reminded me of the water trinity, the Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces connection, where that Pluto transit is. It can really bring you to your knees, whether it's in prayer, you said, or for some other hard reason. And it does open doors to that Pisces experience, to our connection to something timeless and eternal, when we realize that we're just a grain of sand. And so I really loved the way that you expressed this archetype in many ways, but that was something that really just got me. So thank you so much for reminding us of that.
Thank you for what you're saying. Thank you very much. It was inspiring.
Right. Yeah, well, thank you for being here today. All right, well, we are going to move on to Sol Jonassen from Norway. Sol, welcome back to Guiding Stars.
Oh, hello, welcome to Norway.
And I love your vibe and your space right now, and I can feel you're ready to illuminate us.
Yeah, this is a good space to be doing this particular thing, because I had the great privilege of covering Venus and Uranus in Scorpio. And the space that I'm in right now is very Venus-Uranus. It's a group effort studio space where we have a lot of artistic things happening, and it's just a playground for Aquarian souls with some Pluto, with a little tint of Pluto inside of them. And Pluto being, you know, such a growth enhancing, it's kind of like an enzyme in a way. It's like it's forcing you to confront certain limitations and obstacles in yourself. And especially, you know, Venus in Scorpio, since it's a personal planet, and it relates to our capacity to connect with others through mutual values and a sense of equality. When it's in Scorpio, it becomes so much more intense and challenging, all these things, because it's constantly confronting you with the need for a deeper authenticity and to ground yourself in what I call true power. I think, you know, part of the work that Pluto is doing for us, showing us, because it is the agent of the soul, it is the enzyme which produces the connection with the soul, and the soul provides the way that the way that I can perceive my own soul quality is that it is completely free. It is almost like the sun is simply like a pulsating, radiating heart of light in a way. It's just complete. It came out of nowhere, and one day it's just going to stop beating. And it's like that kind of true power, instead of opposed to all the false power we can get in our lives through other people's acknowledgement. And what I call the outsourcing of love, which is something that I find happens a lot when anything Scorpio is around. And Venus in Scorpio will be particularly intense because this is somebody, an individual born with such a placement, is somebody who came into this lifetime with the karma to really work on that capacity to ground into your true self-worth. I consider Venus to be the planet that has nothing to do with self-confidence. Self-confidence is a day-to-day thing. You can feel energetic and vibrant in yourself because you're young, or you get something for free, right? It's like an abundance of energy. That's like, in itself, it translates into self-confidence because you mastered a skill that gave you the opportunity to express something in yourself. And let's say it's Italian. You managed to learn Italian, and then you are very confident with Italian and going, oh yeah, I know Italian, but then you stop practicing Italian. And then 3 years later, you forgot all the Italian. And next time you want to speak Italian, you wouldn't speak it with such conviction as if you had it more fresh into your system. You forget things. And that's the thing with self-confidence, because it's relating to skills. And we live in a world where we are gaining a lot of self-worth due to the things that we do or represent, or what we can give to others. And that's particularly something that an individual with Venus in Scorpio has to confront inside themselves. This kind of false way of gaining love, you know, either through a very, through sexuality or through being very useful for somebody or helping others. They often end up in the role as the psychologist in their own relationships. And you know, the way that I've managed to observe that is that part of that has to do with you being helpful or useful for somebody. So it sort of quiets down that fear of non-being, which is more or less the primal wound. It is that feeling of non-being. And self-worth is the foundation rock upon which your personality can function well. You know, self-worth as opposed to self-confidence is something that's always there. I don't care if I don't speak Italian well, I love myself anyway, you know, like I'm still feeling good about myself. So it's more like a grounded thing, and that's the polarity point that we experience when we go through Taurus. It's polarity point. And this is very often something that happens with these Scorpio placements, that you have to go to your polarity point to ground deeper into your own true sense of self-worth without having no external feedback loop happening. And it's a tragedy that, of course, sometimes people with Venus in Scorpio ends up in very deep and difficult relationships where they're being thrown in on themselves in order to work on that projection of outsourcing that need for love and validation over to another person that they are in relationship to. And that's when it gets tiresome for these relationships, because then you end up in jealousy. Jealousy is an expression of not feeling well about yourself. When you feel threatened in one way or another, it's a very normal feeling. It's one of the most primary feelings we have. Even cats feel jealousy. You know, you feel threatened that you aren't worth enough, like whatever you are, without having to give something or share something. The abandonment issues that sometimes comes up with Scorpio, sometimes, you know, throws this individual into itself, so they have to question their own self-worth and pluck away everything that's not authentic. So it's kind of like the inconvenient truth. And from a soul level, these individuals come into this lifetime in order to really grow a sense of real self, a sense of true self. And that's something that then we can move into Sagittarius, which is the following archetype, and start expanding and sharing with the world whatever we found in there. And it's beyond life and death. It's beyond life and death. You know, you often stumble upon the phenomenon of death in Scorpio, and the losses, and also the traumas. The chart you showed from the woman who was dancing, she had a Venus-Pluto square, right? It was very beautiful how graphic that was in her work, how she's, you know, feeling like, okay, I could actually strengthen myself after trauma through working on my true self, my untainted, pure, sexual, sensual nature, the one that's not like you're dancing as if nobody's watching. When somebody who's gone through that kind of trauma, when they can get there into that freedom again and really hold well their boundaries and never compromise boundaries or values, then they manage to master that very often difficult challenge that comes with the territory of Venus in Scorpio. So yeah. And Venus, the Scorpio-Uranus generation is kind of bugging me. It's the people who are born around my time. I'm still a Venus and Libra, no, Uranus and Libra type, but I have plenty of people with that Uranus and Scorpio thing. And I remember once there was this frustrated girlfriend who's like, what's wrong with this man? You know, like, oh, Uranus and Scorpio, that's what's wrong with him. You know, like not that wrong, but he was not available emotionally. And there are some sub-generations to this Uranus and Scorpio generations that are more, like there's a sub-generation where Uranus squares the south node in Aquarius, and then this disassociative challenge becomes even more visible. But Uranus and Scorpio is also, you know, maybe a previous life imprint with somebody who's gone through trauma, massive shocks and traumas, like they're just like, and in a classic Uranian way, just frozen into it. It's like just a frozen memory. I would call it like a bardo, you know, like I consider these states we come into when it's deep trauma or something is disassociated, or, you know, these kinds of frozen states. It's like a bardo of ice, and you can't access the emotional energy within it. So now that this generation is going through Uranus opposition, I think, you know, a lot of them will start opening up to true intimacy, and stop being, it can be quite raw, this energy, it can be quite cold. It's like, that's like not beyond empathy, but yes, there's definitely challenges with empathy in certain cases where Uranus is in Scorpio. This is just what I've observed and experienced, right? For me, I've taken a lot of time to delve into this archetype because it was a mystery to me, you know, like I was baffled. It's like, what is that thing, you know, this Uranus and Scorpio generation? Now that they're going through their Uranus opposition, it is evident that it's opening up the door to true intimacy. Because if anything, Scorpio is the territory of true intimacy. There can't be lies in this area. You will feel it in the psychic space between people. Now, there's like, it can be a little bit too confronting, and I think Scorpios know this very well because they carry the burden of always being the one who has to say in the back, you know, I have to talk about this, and you guys, you can live in your denial, but I have to talk about this. I'm so sorry for ruining the dinner party. I have some Pluto individuals who's always like, I don't know, is it smart to invite her? She's always bringing up these very difficult features for us that we have to, like, really the change maker of the family. Like, hey, listen, people, we need to have a meeting. We need to talk this thing through, you know, like, can't leave nothing unprocessed. And it's such a beautiful thing to see some of these Uranus and Scorpio generation who carry this massive trauma with them from previous lifetimes, or whatever, you know, there's just that abstract, like, no, don't get too close to me, please, hello, you know, like, there's like this very strong, like, poof, get away, you know, like, it's too close, poof, you know, anything that's Scorpio feels threatening to the Uranus level of objectivity and rationality that, you know, Uranians often prefer, this objective distance truth. Like, let's have a normal conversation about this. Let's not kill each other and have a bloodbath like sometimes happens when Scorpio's in the house. You know, it can be pretty intense and challenging. So yeah, I'm happy for the Uranus and Scorpio generation who are definitely here to do a quantum leap in the area of intimacy, and who are learning to trust again, going deeper with people without fearing that loss, the abandonment. I mean, I just thought of that when the South Node entered Capricorn a few years ago, like it's probably 2 years ago now. And I was just catapulted into some obsession around the world wars. And I'm like I had to go back in time. And what it made me realize is that we carry so much history inside of ourselves. And I can just imagine, you know, where we've been. It must have been brutal, huh? Like, wow, imagine the stuff you've gone through. Imagine all the people you lost. Sometimes I'm like, and I went all the way back to the plague, actually. I don't know when it was, like September or something. I had this great, like last year, I had this great inner journeying. And I had a vision, like, what would it be to be around, you know, living in the Great Plague? Half of Norway's population died.
1,300.
Yeah, that's like, I just imagine being there, and you just see, like, there you are, young woman, and your mother dies, your father dies, your parent, like your brother and sister dies, and there you are, completely alone. And it's just like done really quickly too, because they went really fast, right? And that's the trauma we're talking about, because Uranus is something that went really fast, and the abandonment issues underneath with that Pluto thing there. So now that now that I cracked that Uranus and Scorpio code, I can't wait, because now they're ready to be relieved from their karma with the Uranus opposition. And it's a beautiful thing, because intimacy is very healing for us all. Yeah. So we can probably, you know, like, they can come back to their true soul group again after being, you know, abandoned by their own soul groups, right? So it's a everything. So thank you. Yes.
Thank you so.
Thank you, Soul. I had to laugh. I laughed pretty hard actually because I'm Uranus and Scorpio, and I'm that girl they don't. They sometimes might want to ask about inviting to the party. You know,
Stacie. She's always bringing up the nasty shit we are trying to do.
Yeah, there's just this intense focus on objectification and to talk about the things that people aren't talking about, and so so it gets intense.
Good luck on the Uranus opposition, and believe me, post Uranus opposition is a whole new world waiting for you, Stacie.
Oh.
Your life begins after 40, and everything up to that point is just preparation. So just it's a good time.
I think you nailed it too, Sol, when you were talking about Venus and Scorpio. I wrote this down, the inconvenient truth. Because they feel everything, right? They sense everything in the air. You can't just, if there's something that's lingering, and it can be very inconvenient all the time, oftentimes. So anyway, I always love what you share, and you've got a great sense of humor in the middle of it. And like, you have to have a good sense of humor with a lot of Scorpio energy around it. If anybody has that in their life. And people with a lot of Scorpio need to have a sense of humor. I think that's what keeps you peeps alive, right? So
also something about liberation. Humor is very healing for our wounded egos. The moment you can really let go and laugh at yourself. Exactly. Now that's a liberating moment, man. It's like, I don't care. That's it's just an amazing feeling. So I think that's a good thing to remember too.
There's an art to that for sure. And just being able, the relaxation that can follow that, and just letting something go and not holding on too tight or taking your own self so seriously. I think, humor, like you said, is just, there's like a relaxation element to it that just puts everything in perspective, that Jupiterian thing. So anyway, thank you again for bringing us into your very Aquarian space today. We're part of that group. We've entered Norway. All right.
So that was fantastic. So next we're going to be hearing from Ari Moshe Wolfe. Welcome, Ari.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Ari.
Okay, so we're gonna go a little lighter now and talk about Saturn and Pluto and Scorpio.
Oh my goodness.
So whenever we deal with Saturn, we're always looking at the nature of our own conditioning. And Jeff Green often taught that most souls aren't aware of the extent to which they're conditioned. And when we put this into Scorpio, or the 8th house, we're looking at a whole lot of predominantly unconscious psychological content that relates to our deepest fears. Fears around abandonment, betrayal, core rejection. And the conflict within the Scorpio 8th house archetype is, on the one hand, it's about the soul sovereignty. The soul's very nature is sovereign and whole unto itself. And on this evolutionary journey, in the awakening of this, we are led and drawn into relationship of all kinds. And we form attachments. We form bonds. And we're dealing with Scorpio here. This is not a Libra dynamic. This is Scorpio. So the bonds that we form here are, I am providing and giving absolute trust, giving complete trust, deep emotional, psychological dependency on that which is outside of me. And the almost paradox, and you can really think of this in the inconjunct between Aries and Scorpio, is like simultaneous to that need for awakening to one's soul sovereignty are the limitations of our deepest fears and attachments. And so Saturn here is really about understanding our own conditioning and unraveling the fear. So this can manifest as a fear of opening up, repressed, cold, hardened. I don't want to share in deeper emotional intimacy or commitment. And thus that can express as repressed psychological, sexual, emotional needs for depth, for connection, But when it actually comes to sharing a greater depth of connection and intimacy, there's like a wall. And so a part of the Saturn and Scorpio 8th house journey is really becoming psychologically self-aware and learning to introspect and unravel and sort of go into one's past. Like, okay, what's up with this distrust, with this jadedness, with this deep sense of hurt? And in doing that, there actually needs to be, as per Saturn, anywhere, a container, a safe way to actually go into that which has been repressed. In this case, it could be a deep shame, a deep fear, a deep hurt. And to actually unravel that might mean accessing deep emotions. And it's one of those things about the Scorpio journey is the only way out is through. The only way through liberation and soul sovereignty is to actually come into complete complete acceptance of one's impoverishment, of one's pain, of one's absolute dependency, of one's attachments, of one's needs. And this is where, a lot of souls actually with Scorpio, with Saturn and Scorpio, the 8th house, there's often this dynamic of the parental figure, Saturn, not providing a level of emotional availability and thus leading the individual to feel that a core sense of abandonment and betrayal. And so I don't remember where I read this. I think it's something Jeff Green once shared, but I've seen this. Oftentimes, these children will have issues with wetting their bed well into, even when they're like kids and they're not babies anymore. And it's all about this, fear of letting go. And, it's like all of this repressed energy. And we're also looking at the whole elimination process. There is often a need for souls with a signature to bring a lot of awareness and consciousness into getting enough magnesium, being able to eliminate because of the fear, the holding on, which then creates repression. And anything that's repressed needs an outlet. So energy, sexual, emotional energy, basically finding ways out because it's actually not being integrated in a healthy way. So in the unraveling of this particular signature, it's really necessary. Saturn being the root chakra, from the point of view, it's like the most root chakra of all the root chakra planets. It's like root, structure, stability, everything set up. I can feel safe and secure in this world that I'm living in. There's a need to go into foundational work and being able to access trust and safety and security and even accessing deeper realms. A lot of souls of Saturn, Scorpio, or the 8th house aren't able to access the energy of attachment. There's a total disconnect from attachment because of absolute fear. And so that's the interesting dynamic with Scorpio in general. It could be, deep commitment or this need to, get involved, but don't take me. I don't want to be entrapped. I don't want to lose myself. So there's really a deep need to go into that. And that Pluto energy, while it associates itself, Scorpio, with the root chakra, it's really all of them because it moves up and it takes everything with it. And so it'll meet every little area within ourselves that is suppressed, that is held back in fear. So what a soul can learn with Saturn and Scorpio or the 8th house ultimately is developing mastery over one's emotions, mastery over one's psychology. What am I going through? And basically, ultimately, being able to look into oneself and psychoanalyze, probe deeply within one's own conditioning. Why am I holding myself in this way? What are my fears? What am I actually doing right here? And then to be able to take full responsibility. This another dynamic here is the sexual karma. Right? There can be a strong sense of jealousy, victimization, hurt, revenge that comes with the Saturn archetype in not actually taking the time to know what is the cause and the source behind my strong emotions. Then we're going to get involved into situations and relationships where we're going to recreate the same experiences of being thrown back upon ourselves. So there's a learning of taking self-responsibility for oneself and actually cultivating psychological self-knowledge, and that will take time. Meaning Saturn in the 8th house is a process. It takes time because the soul has to actually get underneath the surface into areas that are just really scary to look at. And so it's one of those things where, as per the Phoenix, you're going into a place where there's a lot of repression, a lot of closed doors. And also, as per Saturn, there can be a lot of assumptions, a lot of ideas of just how things are, how it's supposed to be, and thus not really accessing some of the deeper layers. So there's an important unraveling with a Saturn in Scorpio journey, and the mastery really leads one to be able to go into any kind of experience. Of course, these souls can be counselors and guides and really guiding people in a very solid way through their own darkness, through their own evolution. And there's that ability to go into darkness, whether it's their own relationship or guiding other people, and to hold a clear reference point for how can I take full self-responsibility for my internal experience. Now, let's go into Pluto. The essence of Pluto is desire, and I have such respect and appreciation for Jeff Green's teaching in always pointing us back to desire, that it is the bottom line. And I really want this to be understood in a very direct way. Because when we understand that desire is the bottom line, it ultimately brings us back to, okay, this is the life that I'm wanting, apparently. Right? These experiences and the emotions that it's generating, this is all pointing me back to exactly what I'm desiring. And when our point of power, our point of deepest security, which is where we feel power is, where we project our sovereignty will actually come from, the degree to which it's sourced outside of ourselves is going to bring us back time and time again to then potentially say, okay, this is where I am desiring fulfillment from the outside. And to really look inside, what do I desire? Do I desire to wake up? Do I desire God? Do I desire true evolution? Then whatever it takes, right? Because we have to acknowledge that in that desire, in that bottom line, the energy of Pluto, the nature of the soul, is to then resonate with itself everything that's going to reflect back to us where we are not in full knowledge of our own essential sovereignty. This takes many, many lifetimes, and it's an exhaustion process. We are reflected back where we are holding on to desires on the outside. So Pluto in Scorpio, Pluto, the 8th house, can be attachment, desire linked to anything that provides a sense of deep fulfillment and empowerment from the outside source. And the issue is all of these things are impermanent. And so we might have, a desire to evolve and grow, and then we're going to face the actual reality of things, which is we have all these desires for everything else, and it's black and white. We can't be like, yeah, my desire for, this person to love me and only me, to, make me feel a certain way, or my desire to be famous. It's like all these whatever. It's like, oh, it's also kind of about God. It's not. You can't do that. But we do have that black and white reality here. It's like our desire for the truth isn't consequential. It's not circumstantial. It doesn't have an object to it. And then we learn how to engage with all the things that we're attached to, and to actually understand this is an exhaustion process. And there's, again, no way out but through. So we learn how to use all the things of our life. Our need for fame, then embrace it. If we're not embracing that, it becomes a shadow. If we're not embracing our desires for a certain experience of intimacy, or for a person to know us or love us or want us in a certain way, that becomes a shadow. So we learn how to fully get into it and say, okay, I'm owning this. I'm going to direct my desire energy consciously towards doing all the things that you do to become a well-known whatever and be famous. It's a desire, and you have to exhaust it. And that's one of the ways that you can exhaust a desire, by claiming it, going for it, consciously working with it. I'm going to consciously use relationship as a spiritual path and use it as a way to reflect and bring everything up. So that's one way that we can evolve with Pluto. And the other way that we will evolve through Pluto is, like it or not, the evolutionary impulse is 100% impersonal. It doesn't care about our ego constructs, about our preferences, about how we want it to look. There's a certain compassion in that, because it says we can rest in peace knowing that we don't have to actually make up how this is going to work, because if we did, we actually wouldn't evolve. We'd be too fixed on what we're comfortable with, and we wouldn't move on. So the impersonal force of evolution will very often just say to us, time to let go, face the reality. It's uncomfortable. I know you don't want to, but everything comes and goes. Everything will die. This thing that you really want, that you really like, that was really great, it's gone now. Deal with it. It also points us to look back at our own shadow, our own attachments. How are we in not really understanding and facing our own desires, holding an energy of manipulation and possessiveness in our life? So Pluto and Scorpio in the 8th house can really fall in the two extremes of manipulated, right? Like coming into situations where their power is being taken away, they're being abused, they're being taken advantage of. Very, very common. Pluto in the 8th house, many souls will experience that dynamic of getting to a relationship after relationship where they're being cheated on, they're being abused, they're being taken advantage of. And then we have the other extreme of the Pluto in the 8th house soul that is controlling, is possessing others. In these two extremes, what's the point? Ultimately, it's to look at oneself, take full responsibility for where is my energy? Why am I attracting this? And for the souls that are really working on claiming their power, there's oftentimes an evolutionary necessity in cooperating with this impersonal force to say, done, moving on. This is not what I want anymore. And so there's a need within the Scorpio 8th house archetype to claim one's own power and sovereignty. Doing that can be tricky in that it can also leave a lot of unresolved karma where we're basically outsourcing our own power. Well, you treated me this way, or you did this thing, I'm done with you. That might not actually be claiming one's power. That might actually be running away from looking at one's own deeper emotional responses. So there's a really important journey, a really important internal process with Pluto in Scorpio or the 8th house in really claiming whatever is necessary for evolution to proceed and leaving ultimately no stone unturned. Jeff Green often spoke, if you get into a relationship and then you leave it unresolved, there's that need to, oftentimes Pluto-Venus context, you'll see that, but this can be Pluto in the 8th house too. A lot of unresolved dynamics of jealousy, hurt, victimization, abandonment, betrayal. And that needs to be addressed. That needs to be faced completely. While also knowing, it's an interesting dance, right? Go completely into experience, but also know how to go completely out of experience without all the messiness. And sometimes there's a lot of messiness. It can take years to unravel that messiness. So that's Pluto. I'll just close it with, when it comes to the evolutionary journey, it is it's so helpful to understand that it takes a long time. And time is an interesting factor here because it's both necessary that the evolutionary journey takes a lot of time because we have all these desires. We're looking outside of ourselves and we have to, engage with the content in the unraveling of self-awareness. And yet this sort of mysterious variable that's not really on the chart either is desire, is this mysterious function of choice, of free will. And that's where we all have this sort of freedom to go inside and at any moment ask yourself, what do I really want? What's my orientation? What's my bottom line? And our intensity of concentration on that becomes a focal point through which everything in our life orients around that. And that can speed up time. So the evolutionary journey is a very interesting thing. And it remains for me something that I can't quite grasp because the relationship between time and circumstance and sort of this variable of desire is very much out of anything that we can control.
Excellent. Love that. Thank you, Ari. And I was thinking as you were speaking toward the end about these transits again that I mentioned earlier with Mars retrograde in Aries squaring Pluto that is stationed today. It is about rethinking our choices, rethinking our way forward. And as you said, Ari, our choices will dictate the rate and speed of our evolution. Like you said, sometimes things can happen fast. It's directly linked with, are we honoring what it is that we know we need in order to grow? Most likely it will not be comfortable. And the other thing you said that I really never thought of in this way, so thank you, was when you're speaking about Pluto's the root of the root. And as it comes up through the chakras, it takes everything with it. You know, that helix, and then each element as it comes up. I mean, it doesn't do shortcuts, right? It's all or nothing. And so, you know, when you're not repressing what's natural, and that's what this series is about, when you are accessing your soul, the natural expression of your soul, and what it is that you came here to be, do, and have. And there's nothing else more important than evolving, and that's just true for all of us. Then that plutonium component will just come through every chakra. Every chakra reflects a different area of your life or energy field, and I just love that visual, so thank you for that. Excellent.
Even if it kills you.
Even if it kills you, that Kundalini could kill you if you try and go too far too fast. But Stacie, any last thoughts before we move on?
Just that, you know, the uncomfortable nature of Pluto and Scorpio, that's reflecting the fact that the soul is, you know, Pluto is the deepest unconscious desires, and where we have found security is what's in the known and what's in the familiar. And so we tend to repeat those patterns. And so when you stop repeating the pattern, it's new territory, and Pluto is intense. It's cataclysmic sometimes. So I don't know, I just wanted to speak to that.
Okay, no, that was perfect. You know, there's so many ways to express this energy, and I think everybody's grabbing a hold of words that truly do that today. So, all right, let's move to our next guest. We have Deva Green here, who is the daughter of the founder of EA, Jeff Green. Welcome, Deva.
Well, thanks so much for the time and space.
Of course.
I also wanted to thank everyone for what they've been sharing. What I've been tuning into about the natural expression of the Scorpio archetype, as all of you has been sharing, is the incredible power of choice that we have when we're delivered a very intense wound. And from that choice, from the intensity of the vulnerability and often the desire, Ari, thank you, or the often what comes from that is a tendency to want to lash out, to get even, or to feel victimized, to feel powerless, that we have no options, that we can either act from that place to, in our own way, try to offset those wounds. In some, it's I want to make you feel as hurt as I'm feeling right now, vengeance. And everything's been taken from me, so, you know. But also look at the other extreme, the natural expression, in terms of those who have experienced such violation, who have experienced such intense traumas relative to extending trust that ultimately was not warranted. And look at the incredible regeneration that is happening from this. It's a gift of, I don't want other people to ever feel how disempowered and how violated how I felt. I want to give my power to you, in a way. So it's like extracting at a soul level an ability to, through the wound, regenerate in ways to where it becomes bigger than that one person, where it becomes bigger than the atrocity. It becomes where everybody is generating or coming together in ways that the strength is in numbers. Scorpio, we're all banding together here. We're all coming together absolutely committed to one another in this desire to give each other our power back. And that's really been affecting me as I've been hearing you all share. So I wanted to extend my deep gratitude for that before I began my little bit today. So I'm going to talk about Jupiter and Neptune in Scorpio. And from my understanding, how these archetypes, they're really a beautiful pair to talk about, because Neptune is universal truth. It's our most natural way of spiritualization. There's not going to be one right way for everybody. So when we look at Neptune, in its brightest expression, or in its natural expression, it's how we're naturally meant to spiritualize. And when we look at Jupiter, it's our most natural, it's our most authentic or natural way of being, our personal truth, as well as how we will integrate the world around us based upon our beliefs. And being a fellow Jupiter in Scorpio, teaching that was passed down to me, which I highly resonate with and will make you all have a gallows humor laugh. Think of the word belief. What's right in the middle of that word? L-I-E. Meaning that it does L-I-E. Meaning that it does not take belief to experience the truth. Truth is derived from direct perception. And so many of us, I feel, have experienced a wound that is creating that fear that Ari has shared with us in terms of really being able to expose yourself in a true Scorpio-like fashion, really being able to put all of your chips on the table. And for Jupiter and Scorpio, it's having to know absolutely that there will be no lies here. That if I'm to do that, that there's going to be absolute transparency on both ends. And also getting to the bottom line of limited beliefs, meaning that, let's say, if the pair Jupiter and Neptune, both being in the sign of Scorpio, let's say the soul has come in with a direct perception of the natural use of sexuality, and yet how this has all been misinterpreted, how the sacred has been turned profane. And to me, when you have Jupiter and Scorpio with Neptune, or you have this planetary pair, so much of it is about reinterpreting, reintegrating, re-energizing, or getting your power back based upon regenerating that knowledge of the natural symbols, the natural uses of, let's say, astrology, the natural uses of sacred symbols that again have been turned into something profane. And for Scorpios, there is no bigger injustice than something that's inherently sacred being turned into something that's now profane. And the reinterpretation that can then happen from reactivating what the true meaning of these symbols actually are. It very much makes me think with Jupiter and Scorpio and also Neptune of experiencing the power of nature, experiencing being able to be exposed to your natural truth, to the truth of creation with no beliefs, with no LIEs. Just you and nature, nothing else. And experiencing the absolute rawness, the vulnerability, and the absolute transparency that that can hold. And so being able to reinterpret or being able to expose the limitation of those sorts of beliefs and the fears that can then be generated, meaning that these can be those that very much like the example in the first part of the segment, those that have held false beliefs about their sexuality, about their self-worth. Thank you so much, Soul. And being able to turn that around on its head, being able to bring back or being able to expose oneself and others to the natural meaning of these things. Because from my experience, there's always a natural expression that's just underneath that distortion. And when Scorpio can activate, or when Scorpio can purge and release those parts that have been false and those parts that have been held back relative to these false interpretations, the delusions of power, and so on, it can regenerate in terms of really experiencing a surrendering to a higher source in a way to where it's almost like there's no veil, or there's no need to hide anymore. There's no need to fend yourself off, or to, of course, Scorpio will always protect, but it's not trying to defend itself in that way. It's not trying to defend or protect from intimacy or vulnerability. It's in fact trying to expose oneself to its actual nature, to know LIEs, and to really seeing the natural expression of so many of the functions that have been misinterpreted, whether it's something as simple as wanting to practice astrology, oh no, I'm a heretic, or whether it's from wanting to explore natural forms of sexuality that again have been misinterpreted as perverse. But here's all the unwinding, right, that we've been sharing. And from my understanding, when you see Neptune in Scorpio and also Jupiter, there can be a reconnection to exploring the taboo in order for this type of regeneration to happen. And in order to be inspired, or in order to connect with one's most natural form of spirituality with Neptune in Scorpio, there can be a desire to spiritualize through rituals that connect one to a higher source than just the ego, and using those for sacred purposes, of course, rather than profane. And a good example of somebody who has both Jupiter in Scorpio, it's in the 9th house, and Neptune in the 8th house, is Susan Sarandon. And what she's ultimately done, which I feel is a very natural expression of these archetypes, is that she has lended her voice to speak out for those who are have been incorrectly put on death row because of the color of their skin, and because of an unjust legal system where they can't fight for themselves. This is absolutely a voice that fights for the powerless, and that fights for those who have experienced such an intense degree of injustice and perversion of relative to things that must have felt beyond their control, that she has really advocated to expose these types of injustices and these types of false beliefs about people. Based upon what she's been able to expose is that there really wasn't enough evidence to justify the convictions, that ultimately these were done based upon almost like a snap judgment, or because they weren't really looking for the proof, is what the Scorpio energy exposed in Jupiter. It was looking more for an easy conviction, that it was very easy to, it was they fit the profile, or it's all these kinds of false judgments, which could also be connected to the Neptune being in the 8th house too in Libra, being able to expectation, the distortion of expectation, seeing that, you fit the profile, so we're not going to really dig much deeper than that. Other than to say open and shut, because in so many of these cases they weren't really heard, and in other cases there was minimal evidence that later turned out to be false. And so she has really advocated for exposing these kinds of injustices for what they are, and to lend her voice to helping those who have experienced these types of situations where they were absolutely powerless, absolutely vulnerable, and her natural way of spiritualizing or of harmonizing with a higher power to lend her voice to something higher than herself, with Neptune being in the 8th house, was to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves, who were in situations that were absolutely beyond their control. She has Moon in Capricorn in the 12th house, so that would be the legal system part of it, or to me, the racial issue, which is also a collective issue too. So looking at these dynamics, it's really returning to a natural expression of what's been, in my view, turned on its head as either, again, being considered profane, or being something that's taboo or heretical, or we all know these stories. And with Jupiter and Neptune in Scorpio, it's reconnecting to the sacredness of what's natural, in the sense of exposing these parts that most fear as being so dark. Sometimes what you think is dark turns to be the deepest source of light. It's just how it's been misinterpreted so much of the time. And exposing the darkness that does come from those misinterpretations. So those are my thoughts about these symbols, and again, wanting to thank everybody for joining here together in a true Scorpio fashion and combining our strengths.
Yes. Thank you, Deva. Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Deva. I always enjoy everything that you have to say. You're just so focused on the essence of EA. I just really get a lot out of it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about Jupiter and Scorpio, this is a symbol where it is of utmost importance to learn how to tell the truth. And the reason, I mean, this is an intense process because, you know, oftentimes lies can be convenient and the truth isn't always convenient. And so it really kind of shows that Scorpio process of facing an unknown. What's going to happen if I tell you the truth? What are you going to think? What are you going to say? What are you going to do to me? And it's a very, it's a profound process to really find the courage within to face that unknown and just stand there to commit to truth.
Absolutely. It's putting yourselves on the table no matter what happens. And the Jupiter in Scorpio is tough. It can take it. Whatever you want to throw at me, as they say, whatever you want to do, that's okay, because I'm absolutely here with no veils. And with Susan Sarandon, to it, the Jupiter in Scorpio, in terms of healing and the gallows humor that is needed, and so much healing from this is that she herself, she says, I call myself a comedian, and people say, really, you do? She says, oh, but I'm not that kind of comedian.
I love it.
So exactly to your point.
Oh, Davis, something that was just so beautiful that you shared at the end, I wanted to comment on again. And anybody who's been through some serious Pluto transits knows what I'm talking about. You said what appears so dark can end up being the deepest source of light, something to that effect. And wow, yeah, because the unknown can be so scary. And so thank you for reminding us of that. And I'm reminded too of a client, who she's just been for many months, maybe a year, wanting to ask for a divorce from her husband, and just a lot of Scorpio energy. And I said, you don't have to tell him a novel, just keep it short and sweet, Scorpio style, you know what I mean? Kind of thing. And she finally, I told her, you've got to do it this week, you know, and I just, enough is enough. She's just been worrying herself into a tizzy. And she literally, they had a plan to talk, and he said, do you want a divorce? And she said, yep. And he said, okay. Was that it? I'm like,
oh, and that was it.
For an entire year, you've been worrying about how this would go.
Oh, wow.
So what appears so dark, what appears like the scariest thing of all, and is now the deepest source of freedom. And she just can't, believe her good fortune that she didn't have to sit there. And I told her, I'm like, there's really no discussion. You don't want to do anything, as she's already done. You don't want to do anything to try and repair. You don't feel it's repairable. You just speak to bottom lines, keep it short, and be done. That's it, door closed. And so anyway, she had to finally face it. And the transits are perfect for that, with Pluto stationing, Saturn stationing. It's like, who wants to drag all that into their next chapter? And if there is something you don't want to drag into your next chapter, do it now. Talk about it now.
Right, exactly.
Now.
Such a perfect story.
Right now is the time.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, no more wasting time. I mean, Come on. And I loved your dad used to say, there's nothing, who wants to mark time? It's just marking time if you're doing this or that or the other thing, if it's not addressing what it is that your soul came here to do. And whenever I hear those words, I just, who wants to do that? Marking time. And Scorpio just goes for it and can go for it when, they remove some of the fear. They just, in the case that I just shared, I mean, she just is more about this fear or concern of hurting him. But this is the right thing to happen. Jupiter and Scorpio just, you tell the truth and the right thing will happen, even if it's painful. So all she had to say was yes. And that was all she had to say. She was asked a question. She said yes. And that was it. It's not always that easy, of course, but anyway. All right, let's move on to our next guest. Thank you, Deva. So excited to introduce Tara with us. She's a guest we've had here before, and Southern Cal or Los Angeles gal. Welcome back, Tara. Tara Hall.
Thank you. Whoa, I have so many thoughts. I have two shares before I dive in. The first one, whoa, okay, we haven't talked about this very much, but there's a super psychic nature to Scorpio.
Yes.
We haven't really touched on it a lot. And this is the great part. And they don't always know when they're doing it. This can be Pluto or Scorpio. So as Ari was talking, and by the way, Pluto also can poke a good stick into things, like just knows where to poke a stick. So he literally just talked about getting enough magnesium so you eliminate and release. And this is no joke. Literally just this last week, I've had an ongoing years-on dance with magnesium because I have Pluto in the 6th house and I don't personally like elimination things. So anyway, just this morning I was thinking, because I just started taking it again, I was like, maybe I'll stop because I don't really like how it makes my elimination feel unpredictable. And he poked at me literally today. So just so you know, in addition, by the way, Scorpio can also really go for the kill shot. Like they know where the weakness is, but that doesn't always have to be a negative thing. There can be moments like this where I'm sure he probably didn't even realize he was poking a magnesium stick at me, but it happened. Another interesting thing is just a few weeks ago, I had a new client, and this client had astrology readings before, but not EA readings. And so they didn't even know they had a South Node in Scorpio, and they didn't have anything else in Scorpio. So they were like literally like awakening to themselves as we're talking about the South Node in Scorpio because there was language for it. And then they messaged me afterwards and said that there's this song by Nahko, Nahko, and Medicine for the People, and it's called Twisted. And in this song, he literally identifies himself with the lyric South Node Scorpio. So there's tons of songs with astrology in them, but not very many with real EA references. So he had already been listening to that song, didn't even know he had a South Node in Scorpio. I was like, that is so Scorpio. So anyway,
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, so great. So anyway, I couldn't help from sharing those things because for me, like the real life moments of stuff for me is where it congeals. And last night, I was rereading Jeff's Pluto Book 1 chapter on Pluto and Scorpio in the 8th house. I just wanted to go back and look at it again because this is totally an EA look, and I wanted to make sure I was like honing in on the right spaces. And I just wrote down a couple things, and I just want to share them. So one, he talks about how whether it's Pluto or 8th house, Pluto in the 8th house or in Scorpio, or 8th house Scorpio in general. So when I say this archetypes, this can apply across the board. There's a demand for direct experience. And a lot of you touched on this before, but this needs to be a direct experience of of whatever is the transformer, the transformative power source. So just believing in something, just having faith in something isn't enough when we're working with the Scorpio Pluto energy. And I really want to reemphasize this because I was reminded this morning, I spent all morning listening to Depeche Mode because for me, that's the quintessence of Scorpio. So, I wrote down a whole page of lyrics. It's off the chart. Like if you, one of them is shackled like an animal, chained to my desires. You can go on and listen to all these different things. But what I realized this morning is I don't very often connect my body with astrology. Like I run my head, my South Node Gemini goes crazy. I get all excited, and I maybe even do a lot of Neptunian Piscean stuff. But I realized how Scorpio as an archetype demands us to bring it into the body. Like even as the transmutation or transformation is happening, we need to be present to it. And that's why Jeff talks about, for example, you need to see, feel, taste, touch, smell, hear directly and merge with that object of desire. And so I think this is just a way to encourage all of us that when we're working with Scorpio, we probably need to do more than just read about it or think about it. Like there's a level beneath that where it really, the body's intelligent, like body's intelligence literally like makes it digestible for us. So that, and then another Jeff Wolfe Green quote. Scorpio in the 8th house are archetypes through which all of us come face to face with the limits or parameters of who we are, as opposed to who we are not or cannot be. This is huge because literally with Scorpio, and this is why it's such a shadow dancer, we're literally looking at what we are, whether or not we like it. And someone brought this up earlier too. I think it was Ari said, the soul doesn't really care what kind of experiences it's having to grow. Totally agree. There is no dark night of the soul. It's a dark night of the ego. And when we remember that, we can think about how there's a natural square between Leo and Scorpio. And that literally is the challenge, to let the old ego power go and to empower the self's evolutionary path. Squares are never easy, right? There's a tension in that. I mean, the dueling desires show up really strong in the Scorpio archetype. Now, a few other interesting things, and then I'll launch right into the luminaries. I have the sun and the moon, is that with Scorpio in general, this is like, it's all about to change and be changed through other. And David brought this up, like that's what we're doing here today, right? We're coming together to do something more as a collective than we could do by ourselves. So there's like an osmosis factor with Scorpio. There always is. By actually joining with something, you get what that thing is. But here's the thing, all fixed signs on some level have a scarcity complex. They feel like there's not enough of something. And with Scorpio, this is power. And when you believe that power is limited, and especially when you believe that power is outside of yourself, you will do all kinds of strange, distorted, dysfunctional things to get it and to keep it. And so always, Scorpio as an archetype is about empowering oneself, getting back to our true power source. But we typically don't do that, just like Ari said, until we exhaust all other ideas and avenues that we think is going to lead us to that power source. In other words, we feel a sense of lack. I meet someone, I feel like they have what I'm missing. I merge up with them. I get what I want. Then maybe I don't need them anymore. And this can be a repeating theme with the Scorpio archetype, which is why we feel used. But here's the thing, the whole idea of like taboos and pushing limits, another thing that Jeffrey Wolfe Green says is that temptations have power because they symbolize change. That's a healthy thing to remember. When we're tempted by something, especially in the Scorpio realm, it's because in some way it's pushing us to do something differently. That doesn't mean that that should be a yes or no. I'm not saying that here. But to realize that the attraction to temptations is because ultimately they lead to change. They lead down a different path, a different avenue. Okay, so with the sun and the moon, the luminaries, the lights, they are most susceptible to shadow and to creating shadow. So when we're working with the sun and the moon, to me, we really, there's always and we're all of us are working with shadow, because anything we reject, of course, is going to become part of our shadow. But with the sun and moon, to me, even more so, we're working with that. There are, whether it's the sun or moon or anything else, by the way, just we talked about sex a little bit, but man, Scorpio moon, sexual sign, sexual, seductive. And even if people don't recognize that they're being seductive, Scorpio just has that natural element to it, you know, that it just kind of is part of its nature. So let's think about the sun. If the sun is our sense of purpose, if it's our vitality, if it's the center essence of what we are that everything else has to revolve around, the integration energy in our lives, ultimately, a sun in Scorpio, the purpose is to transform the self at the deepest level. So this is, and this has been mentioned before too, but it's worth saying again, it's the truth at all costs. And because it's the sun, it's illuminating truth at all costs. Even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. It's to penetrate beneath the surface, to get to the real motivation. And there's a challenge to not ever take things at face value. You know, Scorpio wants to rip the face off things and get to the guts. it's not, well, it's just reacting to Libra. Why would, oh, let's look at the pretty face. And Scorpio's like, I don't really, you know, I want to see what's inside that. I'm not just going to take that for face value. So, you know, then we get things like suspicion and all this type of stuff. But ultimately what I believe with this type, with of course, you know, the fear of betrayal and the past life experience of betrayal and the suspicion, this can come from past life experiences. And also just because when you know your own capacity for what we might call darkness, I'm not saying that's a good or bad, but when you know your capacity for certain things, you expect that from others. And Scorpio is more psychologically penetrating than other signs. It knows, whether it wants to acknowledge it or not, its own deep, dark places. And so of course it suspects other people to have those same deep, deep, dark places. It's natural. It's natural. So another thing about Sun and Scorpio is taking relationships to the next level, right? Scorpio is a fixed sign. It's trying to bring value, meaning, and purpose to what was initiated in Libra, which is the partnership. So how do we take it further? How do we get more intimacy from it? How do we actually make it last? How do we do something worthwhile with our union? Oh, I didn't bring this up, but this also is very important to me. I believe this. To truly change anything, you have to be intimate with it. That's the Scorpio archetype. You cannot change something that you have created as an it outside of yourself. You have got to bring it in and have a union with it, be intimate with it. That's the only way change happens. And ultimately here we're talking about union with ourselves, but this is kind of a repeating theme with different areas of Scorpio. And it always helps me to remember, oh, wait, if I'm even calling it an it, I'm not welcoming it back home. And Scorpio is about welcoming all the parts, the wholeness, integration of everything. And then I wrote down, every moment's another chance to get naked, right? With Sun and Scorpio. So, and that can be on any level, right? Because it's about illuminating another dark corner, another dark mystery, right? It's like, and life is exciting that way, right? Scorpio doesn't feel alive unless it's getting into something juicy, which is one reason why it pushes the limits of everything. It would rather have intense tragedy than boring nothing, no feelingness. Scorpio has to feel it to believe it. And this is true for everything Scorpio, but now we're going to move to the moon, and that's especially important for the moon in Scorpio because it is a deep, deep feeling combination there. So I think of the moon many times just about how we nurture, right? Because moon is very much about that nurturing element. So one of the real powerful things about a moon in Scorpio is the ability to help people understand themselves. It can be an amazing therapist, and whether or not you're an official therapist or not, just helping people work through their real feelings, helping them face the parts about themselves that are maybe deeper, darker, or uncomfortable, or that they experience shame around, because there's an ability to get real. Man, can Scorpio get real. You may not like it, but when you do want to get real, that's who you want on your team. And also the Scorpio moon, there's even an intensified level of this fear of emotional betrayal. Right? This is even deeper in this because to me, I believe that the moon is so tied to memory, right? So like with moon and Scorpio, there's these deep, dark memories, but they don't have to stay frozen in time, right? Scorpio water, fixed ice, fixed water being ice. And we know what a force ice is. I mean, just think about the Titanic hitting the iceberg, right? So links into the power of water in the ice form, but it's always a choice to melt, right? And in that melting is when you transform. And for me, that transformation or alchemical transmutation, literally coming into more of what we are, is most obvious in Scorpio. It's where we enter the crucible, right? We choose to melt down, but again, the only way is through, like Ari said. And so back to the moon, just a couple of things on the moon in Scorpio. So there is, I think the word resilience came up. Kristin, I think it might have been with that woman, maybe with the dancer. And one of them, it talked about where it said, I am resilient, or it was one of the key words. And it's funny because I had written it down this morning that moon in Scorpio is extremely emotionally resilient. They can be through hell and back and keep on going. And that's something I think sometimes we underestimate, the ability to go through the fire and keep on going. And, you know, anybody else that's going through the fire, you can only meet someone where you've been. So people count on this type of energy so you can meet them there. There's a shamanic quality to this, right? Literally being able to walk with people through different worlds. and to retrieve different parts of themselves. And I don't believe that we're actually like gone, but I mean to welcome back what is all here. What last things would I say? Okay, so I wrote down, tell me your secrets, but I'm not sure I'll tell you all mine, at least not the real ones. That's a very Scorpio moon thing, right? You feel like you're super connected and super close, but there's like a reservation because, again, that earning trust takes a long time. But once you have that trust, man, you've got someone, I mean, you've got a friend to the end. You've got someone who will literally die for you. There is, the loyalty in Scorpio is unparalleled. And the last comment I had here was, you know, the emotional nature is intense with the moon in Scorpio, and whether or not they are even using intense words, energetically it just shoots through their being, you know, it comes through their eyes, it comes through their pores. It just is like, it's hard even to be around it sometimes. And they don't always recognize it. But the thing is that moon and Scorpio people, we feel better when we actually face all these skeletons in our closets. You know, when we actually let the dead rest, and we do that by honoring the dead, because if we don't really honor the dead and we don't give it a real resting place, it just comes back. And one thing I want to mention about death, because it is my belief that most of the stuff we're working with Scorpio, it's not that it needs to die. It's already been dead for a really long time. Now we're just carrying it around, and it's really getting toxic, and it's heavy, right? Think about toxins in your body if you're not eliminating properly, right? Or just all the emotional baggage. So, and when you have to let it go, it's like when you prune a plant back, sometimes you have to take a little bit of live tissue to get the thing to keep going. So it can be a little bit of an ouch, but Scorpio, you know, even that it will like, because that little moment of feeling that death go is the ultimate moment you feel alive. And for me, Scorpio just uses death because it wants to feel alive. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Powerful. Woo. Wow.
Thank you, Tara.
You're welcome.
Sorry, my computer's doing something.
I pulled up some images.
Sorry, my automated computer thing thought I was summoning it. I was going to say.
Summoning is, it's a very good Scorpio word. You are literally summoning something.
It's interesting how you said you have to go through the fire, or go through the fire to keep on going. And to me, that is the evolutionary impulse, you know, because it's all about becoming aware of that which we are not, the limitations that we have, and then taking the actions to become more, to get farther and farther and farther and farther and farther, and it never ends until there's nowhere else to go. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
I was also, when you said that, Stacie, I was thinking about the picture that I shared of Zoe standing on the ashes of her home. And it's such a Kali archetype, right? I mean, she has moon in Aquarius in the 7th, but the ruler is Uranus and Pisces in the 8th. It's retrograde. And so, you know, ultimately it is about this involution must occur for evolution to occur. Things have to die away in order for us to be reborn. And even what Erin was talking about with, you know, clients asking her if they're going to die because they have a Pluto transit. And I remember going through my Pluto transit on my son's South Node Mercury. That was when I discovered this work. And I remember telling the first astrologer I had a reading with, I was literally 30 years old. I got a late start, people. So if you're, you know, don't worry if you didn't learn about all this when you were young. But I told her these words. I said, I feel like I'm dying a little more every day. And she said, good. You know, I said, and as a Sag, I was not familiar with all that intensity. Let me tell you, I have 3 planets, you know, through so much energy in Sag. And so, you know, there is a need. And you too, Tara, we were talking about things have been dead a long time, about honoring the dead and putting it to rest. Like, you've been carrying that around. It's like turning toxic, you know, all dis-ease is rooted in emotional unrest. So you've got to get rid of it. You know, you got to say goodbye. And so anyway, so much great sharing today. And one last thing I wanted to offer, my mother had a moon in Scorpio, and most beautiful soul, one of the most beautiful souls I have ever known. And I still cry thinking about her. I miss her terribly. And I would consider her to be a consensus soul. I was raised in a very religious home. So Moon and Scorpio in the second house, and she had to put up with my dad. She had to put up with my dad. So that was one powerful soul right there. But she, and when I was young, I couldn't understand why she would, tell me about all these extreme stories that were happening in the world. I didn't want to hear about it. It was just too intense. But it really did prepare me for the world in a lot of ways. And people used to call her when someone they knew was dying. And she used to go sit with them near their hospital bed. And she worked for Hospital Chaplains of America. And she would go and she would pray with these people and with this family. She had no training, and nothing about it scared her. She was an incredibly, she is and was a God soul, like when she was here, truly, but more from a consensus perspective. But she really believed that her prayers were reaching someone. And belief, there is a true power of belief when it is true. As Deva was talking about, it's dangerous when it's not. So anyway, Moon and Scorpio at any stage of evolution can be so powerful. And talk about just in terms of helping people in their transition from life to death, and just being a space holder for that. Right? Of immense emotional support for these people. So anyway, Tara, you were just epic as always. I just loved everything.
Okay.
Huh?
Peter's doing what Stacie's was doing. That's kind of
scary. I know.
I was going to say what you just said. With Scorpio, it's okay to get messy. And a lot of times in life, we don't have permission to get messy. Sometimes it's great just to be okay to be messy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Amen.
All right. This is such a big webinar today. We're going extra long. We have a lot to talk about, but we have one more speaker. We gotta bring on Stacie for our 2 last planets. So, all right, Stacie Pazura, let's go. Your turn.
All right, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So I'm talking about Mars and Mercury today in Scorpio. I'm going to start with Mars. So Mars is the lower octave of Pluto in evolutionary astrology. And what this means is that in the soul, in the soul, we have unconscious desires. The soul is Pluto. In Mars, we have that conscious active component where we can focus on those desires and then act upon them. The main, with Mars and Scorpio, there's just going to be a very intense and focused desire to work on oneself, to really understand oneself, to understand when I say focusing on desires, what does that mean? You can start by focusing on your intentions and your motivations, your behavior. Why did I do this? Why did I not do this? Why did they do that? Why did they not do that? And you learn a lot. Mars in Scorpio is an inverted energy. So that energy is turning inside to look deep. It's, and one thing, we've been talking, there's been a lot of references to roots, and I kind of want to add on to that, which is, if you think about a root of a plant, its function is to anchor the plant, and it's also to absorb water and nutrients. And the root is different from the stem because this is coming from internal tissue, right? Whereas a bud on the stem is external. So it's all underneath the surface. And in my view, Mars is kind of the conduit there. It's the thing that goes down into the root and brings the nutrients and the water, you could symbolize water as consciousness up to the conscious self, such that action can be taken. Let's see. I had a whole thing planned out, but a lot of people have already addressed these things, so I'm just going to try and tie things up. So Mars mobilize. Mars mobilizes what emanates from the soul. That's really kind of what I wanted to say about the root. With Mars in Scorpio, there's also a learning of the right and wrong use of power, because Scorpio is all about personal power. Personal power is what allows us to fulfill our desires. And so when we can't fulfill a desire, we look at, okay, well, what am I lacking? What is no longer working? What's stagnant? And that is the reason for all of this introspection and all of this psychoanalysis, to really understand oneself. Let's see. Oh, also, let's see. Yeah, it's learning the right and wrong use of personal power. And so, sorry, I'm having a brain thing. And so the misuse of power is always going to correlate to manipulation tendencies, to override the will of another in order to get one's own desires fulfilled. Whereas the right application of power is to honor your will, but also to think about others' will, to let them have their will. Don't manipulate them so that they can't have their will. Find what you need to evolve within yourself. Find the limitations that you have. Become aware of the fixed patterns that are in place that are preventing you from moving further, and the compulsions, to become aware of it so that you can introduce different things. Let's see. Within this is also the need to understand the role of inner and outer confrontations. Confrontation is the thing that often occurs with Scorpio, and that's because we have an outside reference that is making us, well, sometimes inside, aware of these limitations. And when we become aware of these things, we can then look for symbols or people or experiences that supply what we haven't quite developed. Sexually, Mars in Scorpio is, in Taurus, we have the instinct to procreate, and in Taurus, we have the instinct to procreate. In Scorpio, we have pair bonding. And so this is about moving beyond the Libra stage, where we're looking at a variety of partners and this and that, and we're getting to the point where we're ready to choose somebody to commit to grow with. And that's the key word, growth, because evolution is needs growth. Let's see. And it's also, to Mars in Scorpio is the need to really understand the nature of sexual energy itself and the proper way to use it. So with Mars in Scorpio, we say intense, we say intensity when we talk about Scorpio. What's intensity? It's a fixation, it's a concentration of energy. And sometimes within the Scorpio soul, it really does kind of build up, and there comes a time where there needs to be a release. And so sexual energy is frequently used in this way, but there's so much more available through that, because in the process of the sexual exchange, you're directing the energy of the Kundalini to come up the spine. And so, within that, it really does. I mean, you have an orgasm and it's like pure release, and it's a renewal, and it's a refreshing. I should also talk about sexual karma, which is something that Jeffrey Wolfe taught quite a bit about, which is that when we sexually unite with another person, we take in their karma through the sexual fluids. We take in the things that are emanating from their roots, and they are taking in what's emanating from our roots. It's a merging, and we take pieces into each other. And so part of the Mars in Scorpio process really involves becoming aware of the pieces of other people we're carrying around versus who we are without that, who we are naturally, originally. And I can't remember exactly who mentioned it, but it's that process of periodic withdrawal and isolation to really focus on oneself, to remember who one is versus this is not me, this is something I picked up, you know, and that happens through investigating your intentions and your motivations and how you behave. So it's very much an archetype of focusing on the question why is it like this, why is it like that. And this leads me to Mercury, which is, you know, Mercury is the function in our consciousness which allows us to make sense of the world, to categorize our reality, to make associations, to learn how things work, to communicate and diversify. And when Mercury is in Scorpio, there's going to be a very, again, the energy is introverted, and so, or internalized. So there's going to be a very strong focus on what is happening underneath the surface of what we can see. You could say this is part of the reason why taboo is associated with Scorpio, because taboo tends to be things that people hide. And there is this genuine desire to know what that's all about. I'm not saying all Scorpios are attracted to taboo, but that's one of the reasons one could be. It's Mercury in Scorpio is the classic detective archetype. You know, why this? Why did it go this way? And what was that for? And it just very intense scrutinizing. And this does lead to the bottom line. It leads to the exposure of things that weren't previously known, and things that just were not perceived on the surface. Let's see. In relationships, Mercury and Scorpio, I mean, this can really correlate to a gravitation to having very deep conversations with other people, where you really bare each other's souls, where you call each other out. I have Mercury in Scorpio, so I enjoy that. I enjoy it when somebody calls me carpet, you know. And let's see if there's anything. Oh, and as far as Mercury and Scorpio, one of the, you know, I was talking about merging with other sources of power, you know, to become aware of things that may be lacking, or a sense of power that you need. And you can focus the concentration. One of the things that I do is I listen to music, specifically drums. I have this Native American song that just has deep bass drums and just other sounds, and there have been a couple of times in my life where I've felt extremely unsafe, physically, like immediate sense of danger, and not knowing, you know, feeling just absolutely exposed and vulnerable. And one of the things that I would do in those times of fear is I would turn on that song and I would just close my eyes and listen to the drums and imagine myself surrounded by a whole circle of drumming Native Americans with owls sitting in the trees and wolves howling, and literally created a sense of protection for myself. So I merged with that sound, and it gave me what I was lacking. So that's just kind of an example of that. But I see that I've run out of time, and so I'm gonna go ahead and end here.
Thank you, Stacie, and hear that music. That part about you're exchanging a part or a piece of another with another person, right? This imparting knowledge when you're intimate with somebody, and that all of our past is held in the cellular or in the fluids of our body, in the cells of our body, but in the fluids of our body. So there is an exchange that happens. And Jeffrey used to say that's why when you see someone walking down the street that you were intimate with, they're more deeply in you, you know, you feel them. And so Anyway, I'm so glad that you added that and mentioned that today, because it's such a powerful point and part of that Mars in Scorpio, and because of the nature of how they take in others, how they osmose others, how deeply they take another soul into themselves, and vice versa. So if you are intimate with someone with Mars in Scorpio or the 8th house, what you experience from them, I mean, it is intense. It's like nothing more intense, perhaps.
Yeah. And this really emphasizes the importance of choice making, to really choose.
And who you're taking in, like, do you really want that person?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I remember too, one last thing before we bring Ari on for our song, is that one of the girls in back in the schools that went on, one of the students asked, because Jeffrey was sharing about this very same topic, and of course someone sort of panicked, right, because of being with certain souls that she wished she hadn't, and wanting to know how to purge them from her being. And so he talks about the Agni ritual that you can do, where you put a fire in your third eye, and fire is the greatest purifier, and you bring in all the memories into that third eye. But there's not a total purging that can happen, but there's a purifying that can happen. We can't change what happened. We can change our orientation to it. But that's one way, as you evolve and spiritualize your life, that you can be free from it. And so the Agni ritual, AGNI. All right, well, thank you, Stacie. Thank you, all of you. This was an awesome 3 hours. It was a long one today. Every minute. Die before you die. Here's Ari, Moshe, Wolfe.
Okay, here's a song, some good advice.
That's a good idea, by the way. Yeah, I like that.
Just a suggestion. Die before you die, let go. Before you lose, now you should know. If it comes, that it will go. But you are whole forever, so. Samsari, samsari dai, samsari, samsari dai. Completely live for now alone. You're safe to trust, you're safe to share all your love. It's not to hide, you are the light, God lives inside. Samsadadi, samsadadadai, samsadadi, samsadadai.
Oh. Ari, your music is so healing.
Those chords were amazing. Well done.
I mean, there's just nothing like music to allow you to bring those walls down and get into that Scorpio place, right? It just does. It creates that shift immediately. So thank you all for being here today, all of these wonderful speakers, these incredible souls. I love this family. And thank you, Erin Sullivan. Wonderful today to have you as a guest. Our next panel will be Saturday, October 17th. We will discuss Sagittarius and all the natural expressions of that. I can't wait to be together again. Namaste.
Namaste.
Oh, and to our, I'm sorry, to our volunteers and to Linda, my goodness.
Thank you. I was going to do it, but then you said namaste.
Thank you for all you do. Look at all those names. There's so many people that make this possible and are contributing to a book ultimately. So thank you. Oh my goodness. And Linda, for your sleepless nights. There's so many of them. Thank you for all you do. Look at all those names. There's so many people that make this possible and are contributing to a book ultimately. So thank you. Oh my goodness. And Linda, for your sleepless nights. There's so many of them. We so appreciate you.
She is an amazing woman.
Absolute
truly.
commitment to serve.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. 9 lives, I think. All right, the School of Evolutionary Astrology.com. If you haven't checked it out, we do have a wonderful message board there where you can post questions or just read along with what other people are sharing and offering there. So we welcome you.
Thank you.
Another namaste. Right?
Namaste.
Yeah.